All right, Matt, listen. With Fight Night Picks, Parry and Counter, we're getting into the light heavyweight division, one of the most interesting divisions in MMA right now because who knows what's going on at the top, especially in the sport's biggest promotion. So thanks a lot for joining us. Maybe this is the first one of the Grand Prix that you've checked out. And listen, we'll get into that in a second, but we profiled all the way from flyweight up to middleweight. You can go back into the catalog and check those out. We're going to go up to heavyweight tomorrow, so make sure you check out that video. And as always, we're going to break this one down in terms of the tournament format. So Matt, without further ado, this is similar to like a Rise and Pride style tournament where every fight in this Grand Prix, they're 5-rounders. So you have to take that into account. You also have to take into account accumulated damage throughout the tournament format. And listen, maybe there's some names that you wanted to see in our bracket of 16 that you don't see there currently. Maybe you're a big Devin Clark fan. Maybe you're a big Ryan Spann fan. You want to see those guys in here. Maybe you're not a fan of Vadim Nemkov or Phil Davis. Some names from the future and from the past in this division currently in MMA. And listen, again, this is a different type of cross-section where it's not just UFC fighters. We have KSW's Tomasz Narkun. We have guys like Bader and Nemkov and Davis from Bellator. We have the UFC's new addition of Jiří Procházka. I mean, lots of different names coming at us from lots of different organizations and a really interesting one. Matt, in terms of first-round matchups, which is the one that you're looking forward to the most?
I think Anthony Smith and Dominick Reyes is a fight that just needs to happen for the division. Anthony Smith was rumored, well, he wasn't rumored, he was booked in a fight with Glover Teixeira. Of course, with everything that's going on right now, that fight can't happen. But these are two guys who I think everyone agrees, if they're not the next in line for a title shot, they're one away for it. So we could just kind of get right to the point. Have these two guys fight each other. The winner of this fights maybe the winner of that fights for maybe they fight for the real title. I have no idea with what Jon Jones getting himself into right now, but it's just a fight that needs to happen for the division. Both guys, they kind of had Rakic strapped to the back, went all the way to the top really quick, lost to Jon, of course, lost to Jon, if you will, and Dominick Reyes, but had pretty competitive performances against Jon Jones. Anthony Smith, not so much, but I think Anthony Smith was the first time that Jon Jones fought an opponent that we all knew he was going to beat and didn't look as impressive as Jon Jones has in the past. I think it's a really good fight, and it's a fight that should happen in the future.
And an interesting one, too, with that fight. I mean, Dominick Reyes coming off the title loss, whereas Anthony Smith lost. Then he came back and retired Aleksandar Gustafsson in Sweden and put on a great performance there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that one goes. For me, a lot of fun different matchups. One of the ones that we've already seen before, it's just going to be off of a bit of a layoff for one of these fighters, is Thiago Santos, Jan Blachowicz. I mean, yeah, the fight happened, and you had Santos from 185 to 205. Okay, really, what's the plan? What are we going to get with this guy? Man, he's looked great. I mean, he had one of the closest fights against Jon Jones that we've ever seen. Not just the Gustafsson one fight, but really just in general. And then since then, we had the Reyes fight as well. So it's going to be interesting to see Thiago Santos coming back in. He's taking on Jan Blachowicz, who you want to talk about a guy that's put on great performances. For me, since Jan Blachowicz faced Nikita Krylov, that was it. Like, that was it for me. This guy looks like he's really going to do things at 205. And to his credit, in his last fight against Corey Anderson, beast in 25-8 in Jon Jones' home state, New Mexico. They made it a big deal. I know he's not from New Mexico, but still, adopted home state, if you will. And maybe that's the fight that we get. Well, now, who knows? So you get Thiago Santos in the rematch with Jan Blachowicz. To me, that's a really fun fight. Also worth noting, with our bracket of 16, your champion is number 1, and everybody else is randomly seeded. So you might see a name in there like Thiago Santos at 11 and think, hey, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's the way that we did it. We hit shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Champ stays at 1, and then we get what we get. So out of these first-round matchups, if we start up at the top, you have your KSW champion, Tomasz Narkun, taking on Jon Jones. Matt, Narkun right now looks amazing in KSW.
And I like that you prefaced it by saying he looks amazing in KSW. Narkun does not have the highest level of competition over there right now. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the case. It's not his fault that he's not fighting the best because he has to fight whoever's put in front of him. It's just the state of the division over KSW right now. They tried to either make him go up to heavyweight or have middleweights move up to fight him because he's really the only 205er right now who's very competitive in their organization. So although Narkun's a good fighter, he's not Jon Jones, and he's getting run over. This is as much of a buy as we've had in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, good forward pressure, really good striking abilities, decent wrestling. I mean, you saw that in the Kaladov fights, but still, Jon Jones does everything quite a bit better. That's all you can say.
Yeah, he would get through this with basically 0 damage and 0 fatigue. He's got to buy it in the first round.
Yeah, so I'm taking Jon Jones in that one as well. Aleksandar Gustafsson, Volkan Oezdemir. That's an interesting one because you could say, well, Gustafsson's retired, but I still consider him to be one of the top light heavyweights out there. And in a fight like this against Volkan Oezdemir, again, that's where things get really interesting. But for me, Aleksandar Gustafsson, he fought for the title again, didn't go all that well. He's had long layoffs at different points in his career. He's had title fights off of losses in his career. He's had a really weird run.
Yes.
We really profiled him as one of those all-time greats that never won a belt. Aleksandar Gustafsson's in the thumbnail, and I certainly could not agree more with that statement. But in a fight against Volkan Oezdemir, this is, again, a guy that in his UFC run, he's only really lost to the best of the best. His loss to Dominick Reyes was a damn close fight, and I would think that, Volkan Oezdemir, I thought won the fight, but still, since then, he's looked good.
Oh, 100%. I think Gustafsson in his prime beats Volkan Oezdemir in his prime. It's just neither guy. Well, one guy's no longer in the prime. Oezdemir, even he hasn't looked. And I think he's looked good, but Oezdemir is a really good case of he has to be, or you have to be weak for him to be strong. Like, the only way he's going to win is if you give him a way to win. I find in a lot of fights, at least, because he's going for that knockout shot a lot of the times, which doesn't always pave well if you're trying to win a 5-round decision, especially in a night as long as the one that we've crafted. But I do feel like, at least at this point in their careers, yes, Oezdemir would win, but it's going to be a hard fight for him.
Next one, Ryan Bader versus Corey Anderson. So you have Bellator's light heavyweight champ that hasn't fought at light heavyweight in over 2 years, but was booked to fight at light heavyweight against another guy on this list, Vadim Nemkov, taking on Corey Anderson. So you've got Beastin 25-8, you've got Darth Bader. Still an interesting fight, and listen, if Ryan Bader rode out his career in the UFC and never went to Bellator, I think he'd still be like a top 15 type of guy. He really would.
Yeah, without a doubt. And especially right now, light heavyweight, it's got a few kind of new guys moving to the top of the division, but Ryan Bader would still do quite well. It's basically Ryan Bader fighting a younger version of Ryan Bader, who Corey Anderson does not take a shot all that well. That we know. He's a good wrestler. He's got okay striking and volume, and that's about it. He had that one really nice win over Johnny Walker, but that got kind of blown out of proportion, and Jan Blachowicz sort of brought him back. Ryan Bader does everything Corey Anderson does. He just has a lot more power in the feet. Even though neither guy can take a shot all that well, I think Ryan Bader, just eventually the power would get to Corey Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can't take shots against guys like Anthony Rumble Johnson, but still.
Oh, sorry, Lyoto Machida, a guy who's now 2 weight classes smaller. There's a lot of examples. Ryan Bader just takes a shot all that well. But luckily for him in this first round, Corey Anderson doesn't either.
So Bader moving on. Your next fight, Anthony Smith, Dominick Reyes. Interesting matchup, 100%. Like you said. At this point, I would have to go with the hot-handed Dominick Reyes. And
it's not an easy fight for either guy. Anthony Smith, if he wants to win, got to get in that clinch and elbow as much as you can against Dominick Reyes. It was a position that Oezdemir was able to do quite well against Reyes. And the other thing, too, Oezdemir took down Dominick Reyes, and I know Reyes came out and said, I just didn't expect him to do it. That was a big reason as to why he was able to. And Jon Jones wasn't able to take down Dominick Reyes, so look into this as much or as little as you want to. Anthony Smith is very, very good on the ground, though, and if he is able to take Dominick Reyes down, and especially get top position on him, it would be the worst position Dominick Reyes could possibly be in, and it would be a hard one for him to get out of, but I do agree with you. I would take the hot hand.
Pointing back to the fight, Anthony Smith and Volkan Oezdemir, I mean, a fight where you saw some definite bright spots, I guess is what I'm trying to go with, for Volkan Oezdemir. He was able to back up Smith up against the cage, land some good shots, and then he kind of waned a little bit, and that's where Anthony Smith was able to beat him at his own game, get him down to the ground and finish it, which is something that you would expect him to try and do against Dominick Reyes. Again, I just see Reyes as, yeah, the Oezdemir fight was really close. Yes, he knocked Chris Weidman into the water, but then he had a really close fight against Jon Jones, and he lost it, but you can't discount that performance. It was an all-time great one, especially for Dominick Reyes, so taking Reyes to move on in the division. Now your next fight, Phil Davis, Vadim Nemkov.
I don't need to see that fight happen again.
Yeah, it's happened before. It was a split decision win for Vadim Nemkov. Now for Phil Davis, he's won 2 in a row since then, but still, it's a fight that, yeah, you could flip a coin, I think, in this one. Phil Davis, you know what you're going to get. And again, a guy that if you plucked him from Bellator and put him into the UFC, he'd be having competitive fights against some of the better fighters. He would. I think
Phil Davis or Nemkov?
I still think Phil Davis would have some competitive fights.
It depends on who you match him up against. I think he can beat top 15 guys. I just don't think he beats a lot of them at this point in his career. And it's nothing against Phil Davis. He just has a very kind of old school skill set. Phil Davis, what's he going to do? He's going to grab you. He's going to hold you.
Unless he fights Linton Vassell and knocks his head.
We got to stop. Linton Vassell's just not that great, though. So I don't think getting a highlight win over Linton Vassell is a highlight of a career. So Phil Davis Davis, for as good as he is and as well-rounded as he is, I just feel like his skill set doesn't really... It's not the skill set of a modern-day championship MMA fighter. So I think Vadim just does a lot of different things. He's got a lot more tools in his toolbox. So yes. And the fight wasn't that long ago. Recency bias is something that we do have to take into consideration. So I agree, Nemkov.
And just to say this now, if you want to see a great Vadim Nemkov highlight, just watch his fight against Liam McGarry, where, again, you want kicking things out of orbit. He kicked Liam McGarry's knee into orbit. So next one, Thiago Santos, Jan Blachowicz. Again, a fight that we've already had before. And for Jan Blachowicz, where he sits right now in the UFC, hopefully he gets a title shot, but who knows at the top. Maybe he gets another fight against Thiago Santos. You never know. But that fight against Thiago Santos did not go well for Poland's Jan Blachowicz.
Not at all. And I don't think it would in a rematch either. I think Jan's doing well. But again, Jan's another one of these cases where for him to do really, really well, you have to make a mistake first. It's not just he's so good that no matter what you do, he's going to be able to find a way to win. Jan Blachowicz doesn't have a lot of speed in his strikes, but when they hit, of course, we see what happens. He knocks a lot of people out. Really good on the ground, but not like Damian Maia level, of course. Jan Blachowicz is pretty good at everything, but he has exceptional power. And against a guy like Thiago Santos, who's pretty good at everything, but has exceptional power and speed, it's always going to be a hard matchup for Blachowicz just because he's so behind in the speed category. Because you're fighting a guy who just, is one of the fastest strikers we've ever seen, and you naturally aren't the fastest striker. So Santos and Blachowicz, if they fight 10 times, I think Blachowicz is going to get at least a win, but I just think the style of Santos is really hard for Blachowicz to deal with.
And I would be taking Santos in that fight as well. I mean, you never know currently where he's at, especially with the double, knee injuries plus child on the way.
To be fair, though, we could just take Jon Jones out of all this if we're going to talk about what people are what's going on in people's lives right now, and he just wouldn't be able to fight. So just assuming Santos comes back pretty much what he was before he did get his injuries, I think Santos beats Jan Blachowicz quite handily.
I would take him in that fight as well. Now, where it gets really interesting, in a fight that a lot of people have thrown out in the comments that they actually want to see happen, you have Aleksandar Rakic taking on Ryzen's Jiří Procházka. Oh, wait, he's with the UFC now. And I can't wait to see who they match him up against. Maybe they throw him a guy that's in the 15 to 20 range. Maybe they throw him like a mid-range 15 to 10. Who knows? I think he inserts quite well into the UFC and makes for a lot of fun fights. This guy hasn't lost a fight in who knows when. He just continues to finish opponents over in Ryzen. It's going to be interesting to see how that translates into the UFC. Of course, if you want to go see a good highlight reel knockout, go watch his fight against CB Dalloway in his last time out, where he knocked him out with an insane left hook. It was CB Dalloway, but still, you're taking on Aleksandar Rakic, who's a really long and rangy striker, which is one of those things that we've seen Procházka do well in the past. And you want to talk about his losses. I mean, who's he lost to? He lost to King Mo years ago. He lost to the Chechnyan Eagle, who was in the UFC for one fight. Sorry, Chechnyan Lion, who we saw one fight in the UFC. But still, not a lot of people recently have been able to solve the riddle.
They haven't. But, and I feel like we do have to say this for sake of transparency, the guys trying to solve the riddle haven't spent their lives trying to decode it.
Brandon Halsey,
Jake Kuhn, Fabio Maldonado, and CB Dalloway. So he's fighting recognizable names, but definitely not guys who are in the prime of their careers. And we see this a lot with guys who have a lot of hype outside the UFC. You don't get that hype without fighting recognizable names. So it's at no fault of Procházka. I just haven't seen him fight anyone near the level of Aleksandar Rakic, although I think he would beat Rakic, to be fair. Rakic would be the perfect fight for Procházka coming into the UFC. I really do believe that. I think it'd be a really good measuring stick because Rakic, yes, he lost to Oezdemir. It was a really close fight, though. It was a split decision. You can have it either way.
People still visit our comment section to tell us in our picks, when we picked Oezdemir to win, how Rakic won that fight.
And that's
to
fine.
This day.
I thought it was a really close fight. I didn't really know who to have it for. It was a draw, if you ask me. Both guys have a claim to winning it. So, but you're on that level with a guy like Oezdemir when you're able to go to split decision with him and have a pretty entertaining fight. The problem with Rakic, though, in that fight was he got tired as it went on. And by round 3, he didn't have that, he didn't have the same shot, the same explosiveness behind his takedowns, behind his strikes. So, Oezdemir was able to take advantage of that, and I think Procházka would be able to. But the problem with Procházka, we haven't seen him out of the first round in a very long time, which isn't always such a big gift. It's a bit of a curse, because we saw it with Shane Carwin's the perfect example. Shane Carwin had 12 fights, and they all ended in the first round. He knocked everyone out, and then he fought Brock Lesnar, and he came close to beating him in the first round. Craig to this day brings up the fact that he should have beat him in that first round. But what happens though? When a guy's not used to going 2, 3, 4 rounds and they see themselves in that second, third, and fourth round, they're not the same fighter. So although I do think Procházka wins this fight, I don't think it's an easy one.
I think Josh Rosenthal had a death wish for Brock Lesnar in that fight. And then once it got to the second round, boom, Shane Carwin, the energy bar totally depleted. So be interesting to see how Procházka makes out in the rest of this bracket. But the last fight in the bracket, rounding it out, Nikita Krylov, Glover Teixeira. So again, it's an interesting fight because Glover Teixeira doesn't seem to age, and he still has bricks in his hands.
Also, we just saw this fight about 2 months ago, and Glover won by decision. And kind of a lackluster fight. It wasn't, terribly boring. It was just kind of an average UFC fight. I think Glover would win again. I just think Krylov has so many holes in his game that no matter what happens, when you do give him those higher level guys who can kind of do everything, they're going to figure him out.
I mean, he's good at taking people down if you're not good at takedown defense. And he's good at striking if you're not great at striking. Like, he's able to find holes in his opponents, but it's easy to sit behind a screen and see, hey, here's a flaw, there's a flaw, and Glover Teixeira was able to kind of null those out. And the fact that he's still good at the age that he's at, it's kind of wild. So, we move
Fight Night Picks is brought to you by Strikeforce Energy. Head on over to the website, strikeforceenergy.com. If you enjoy the flavor of freedom, the company's veteran-owned, and everything's made in America. They've got great apparel. You can turn any 16.9-ounce beverage into an energy drink. There's no sugar, no calories, no stirring, or no shaking required. They also have a line of different products as well as Strikeforce coffee. So if I head into my cart, I've got a 4-count sample pack, I've got a 20-ounce coffee mug, and if I head into that checkout, use the promo code FNP, click to apply, and you're going to save 20% off any order. That's FNP at strikeforceenergy.com.
We move on into the next round. We've got Teixeira, Procházka, we've got Nemkov, Santos, we've got Reyes, Bader, we've got Volkan Oezdemir, Jon Jones. Now, interesting fights, some fights that maybe we'd like to see. Again, you'd have to pluck some opponents out of different organizations to get them. Luckily, we have Procházka and Glover Teixeira in the UFC currently. Now, Jiří Procházka coming off a win over Aleksandar Rakic, Glover Teixeira coming in off a win over Nikita Krylov. If Glover Teixeira is able to beat Procházka, how's he going to be able to do it and vice versa?
You got to go for takedowns right away. Again, we're dealing with a guy who his fights aren't very long. He doesn't get paid by the hour. And not to say Glover's not a finisher, because I know especially when he came into the UFC, that's what he was known for. He finished a lot of people. But near the later stage of his career, he can still get those finishes, but he doesn't always force the finish. And I actually really like that about Teixeira at this point of his career. He realizes that he's not as durable as he used to be. So why don't we fight in a style that would kind of help us stay durable for a little bit longer and kind of help us in the longevity of our career? The Procházka fight is going to be a hard one because in the Ion Cutelaba fight for Glover, I know it was a fight that he did win, but you're fighting a guy with kind of a similar skill set, just without the holes that Cutelaba does bring. And Cutelaba did really, really well in that first round, was able to stun Glover on multiple occasions. But then, of course, by the end of it, sort of Glover being Glover and just being tougher than an old leather boot in Connecticut, he just kept on putting the pressure on Cutelaba and was able to break him down from there. I think he would go for a similar style in this fight, kind of weather that early storm and start walking forward. But the problem with walking forward on a guy like Jiří is you're going to walk into a big shot, and I think that would happen at some point in this fight.
And I would agree with you there. The other X factor with Glover Teixeira and really just pumping his tires is his jiu-jitsu. It's one of those things that a lot of people don't talk about, but still, it's very, very good, and it's an X factor that he possesses at the top of that division. Even though he's, aging, the fact that, he's able to pull out a couple of different stops, maybe not go for the finish as quick as possible, and able to really distance himself. And by distance, I mean almost like a distance runner, where he can run the marathon and get there. It's just, you're taking on such a heavy hitter in Procházka. Again, a guy that really could make moves in the UFC. We're going to go with him in this fight. But again, it's another close one and a tough road for him against Rakic and then Glover Teixeira. Now, your next fight, Thiago Santos against Vadim Nemkov. That's an interesting one because you've got a young guy that's on the way up. We've got him winning the rematch against Phil Davis. And we've got Thiago Santos winning the rematch against Jan Blachowicz. So you match these two guys up, and what do you get? Fireworks?
I think you get a pretty quick knockout by Santos. You have two guys who do everything the same. It's just one guy, and I can't stress this enough. Nemkov has good power. Thiago Santos' power is ungodly. He's basically Rumble Johnson who throws 360 kicks. I don't know why people aren't marketing him like that, but Nemkov does a lot of what Santos does, and Nemkov's kind of on the smaller end of a 205er. When you look at him in Bellator, he's not walking around. He looks like a 185er moving up, which is wild to think that he's fighting a 185er who did move up. But Santos is quite heavily muscled. Nemkov's kind of tall and thin. He's not, this overwhelming physical presence. And when you do the similar things that your opponent does, but your opponent's bigger than you, I've always got to pick the bigger guy.
So going with Thiago Santos over Vadim Nemkov there, kind of see it the same way. Ryan Bader, Dominick Reyes. I think that's a really good matchup.
I think it wasn't until about a month ago.
Okay, that's fair. Explain.
Exactly. Well, I thought Ryan Bader would have run over Dominick Reyes until Dominick Reyes, of course, fought and I thought beat Jon Jones. And that performance really kind of has to change your whole outlook on Dominick Reyes as a fighter because, again, I was a guy who thought, okay, Dominick Reyes is good, but this is one of those cases where we don't really have anyone for Jon Jones to fight. He has a good enough claim to get a title shot. You might as well just do the fight. And I thought it was going to be a one-sided kind of beatdown, and it was the opposite. It was Dominick Reyes having amazing boxing, and the takedown defense, too. I think that's the most important part from this fight that we can bring to this Ryan Bader one. Jon Jones was not able to take Dominick Reyes down at all, and he tried very hard, and he had a few really good opportunities where he had the hands locked around him. They were up against the cage, and he still wasn't able to take Dominick Reyes down. So I know Bader's a better wrestler than Jon Jones, but for MMA wrestling, I don't really think there's many people out there better than Jones. So if Reyes is able to stuff those takedown attempts and then beat up Jones on the feet a little bit, I think he'd be able to do the same to Bader. The difference is Jon Jones, at least by the end of the fight, is able to make reads, and he's really... It's wild that I'm going to say this. Jon Jones is one of the smarter fighters out there on a fight IQ base. Just because when you watch him in a fight, he's constantly evolving. He's constantly taking the reads that his opponents give him, and then, just figuring it out. It's like a big puzzle for him. And I just think if Reyes is able to do well against that, he's going to be able to beat Bader.
I mean, he has a hard time deciphering the puzzle that is life and driving.
That's
but in terms of figuring out fighting, if you were of the camp that thought that Jon Jones definitively won the fight against Dominick Reyes, then you can expertly see how he's able to download somebody's game plan and really put into place his own. And that's the one really, really shining spot. I mean, Jon Jones, he's got the one loss to Matt Hamill. And he made a stupid mistake and lost on a technicality. But
apart from a lot of those stupid mistakes, though, so I'm going to stop giving them passes.
But apart from that, in terms of fighting, you can obviously see why he's pound for pound the best in MMA, still ranked there, and all time probably one of the best.
I would argue that fifth round Jon Jones is the hardest fighter to beat because you're giving a guy 20 minutes who can do this in 5 minutes. You're giving a guy 20 minutes to download the information his opponent's giving him, and then another 5 minutes to exploit it. And that's why Jon Jones never loses fifth rounds. You can go back to the DC fight, came on really strong in the fifth round in the first fight. The Gustafsson fight, the first one especially. Again, I can't stand Jon Jones, but when you take him like what he does in the cage, he's got nothing but heart because that's what he does. He figures out what you're going to do, and he puts it all on the line in the fifth round. So he does a lot of the things that like your favorite fighters probably do. It's just outside the cage, he does a lot of things their favorite fighters probably don't do.
So Bader and Reyes, you got Bader coming in off of Anderson, WrestleFest, but probably Ryan Bader lands power shot and finishes it. So Bader's coming into this one against Dominick Reyes, who had a tough fight against Anthony Smith.
I still think Reyes wins.
Nonetheless, I think Reyes would win that fight as well. But still, I'd be really interested to see that one. And then at the top, we just gave the praise where it was due. Volkan Oezdemir, though, coming off a win over Aleksandar Gustafsson. Jon Jones with the pass over Narkun. And that's kind of it. I mean, if you're Volkan Oezdemir, I think in terms of the scale of the top guys at light heavyweight, I would favor Reyes, Santos, and Smith over Volkan Oezdemir to get a win over Jon Jones. And for that reason and that reason alone, I would move Jones further into the bracket.
Volkan's going to land some good leg kicks. He'll probably land a few good shots, but he doesn't have the output that those other three guys that you mentioned do. He doesn't have the Santos, the Anthony Smith, the Dominick Reyes. Just Oezdemir after that second round, the power bar is going to go down a little bit because he's so heavy-handed.
That's it. I mean, we're talking about Oezdemir and Gustafsson in a 5-round fight. Now you're in another 5-round fight against a guy that just fights 5-round fights in Jon Jones.
Exactly.
So it's pretty difficult for Oezdemir to get a win there. We had the pass for Jon Jones, which he gets a pass in this tournament, but he gets passes in life too.
He does.
Jon Jones, Dominick Reyes, the rematch. Thiago Santos, Jiří Procházka. Again, numbering doesn't really matter because it's random shuffling except for your champ at number 1. Let's start at the top. Jon Jones, Dominick Reyes. Very, very close fight. It was a unanimous decision win for Jon Jones, whereas when he fought Santos, it was a split decision win. But do you see it going a different way?
I think Jones wins more dominantly the second way. And it pains me to say, but in every rematch that Jon Jones has ever had, he looks 9 times better. It's kind of insane. And I think it does go back to, the amount of video and information on a fighter, especially when you're Jon Jones, the amount of information on your opponent is so important because if you spent 25 minutes, because again, he really only fights 25-minute fights, when you've been in there with a guy for half an hour and you have another half hour to figure out even more holes in his game, and say what you will about the Jackson Wink camp, but they're still one of the better camps in the world, and they're still well known for having really good game plans. So I just think the more time in the cage with Jon, the more dangerous he becomes. And for that, if they did have a rematch, especially so sudden after their first fight, I think Jon would be able to win.
So Matt, Jon Jones getting the win in the rematch against Dominick Reyes. Now here's where we're going to split hairs. We're going to split totally differently. But Thiago Santos taking on Jiří Procházka again. We've got the rise in influence coming into the UFC, plenty of finishes. We've got Thiago Santos that, apart from the loss to Jon Jones, was on a crazy streak of his own.
Tied with Anderson Silva for most knockouts in the middleweight division.
And Thiago Santos at 205 pounds continues to finish fights. Now, in this bracket, he's faced Jan Blachowicz in a rematch. He's faced Vadim Nemkov. Procházka's faced Glover Teixeira and Aleksandar Rakic. So style for style, Procházka, Rakic, very similar. Procházka, Teixeira, some differences in their styles for sure. You're probably going to get a striker's paradise in this fight, I would think. What do you expect in this one?
So you've got a guy who kicks against a guy who doesn't really kick. And that's always a big thing for me. I think when you just decide not to focus on 50% of your weapons, it's not the best idea. And we've talked about guys like Darren Till doesn't kick a lot, but he's really smart with his kicks. He's going to throw the inside leg kick, which is going to open up his Muay Thai. Procházka kind of does that, but just not to the same level, I don't think. And again, this is a guy who's very new to the UFC. He just got signed. Like, he hasn't had a fight yet. So I'm sure after his first fight, he's going to get exponentially better right afterwards. So nothing against him in that regard. But at this point, if we're dealing with the Santos who has fought Jan Blachowicz, who he's already knocked out without taking much damage against, so I don't think we can assume that Jan's going to heavily damage him in the rematch. And against a guy like Vadim Nemkov, who has a big size and strength advantage over, and I think he'd run through him as well, you're dealing with Thiago Santos, who's kind of close to 100%, against Jiří Procházka, who also is, so I don't really think their previous matchups have that much to do with this. If we're taking both guys to 100%, I think the guy who decides to A, kick a lot more, and B, I've seen Thiago Santos in 5-round fights with 2 ACLs broke or tore, and I still thought he won the 5th round against Jon Jones, a guy who I just got done saying might be the best 5th round fighter in the UFC. I think Thiago Santos beats Jiří Procházka. Nothing against Jiří, it's just he hasn't shown me anything to the near the level of what Thiago Santos has. Thiago Santos is beat. He's knocked out Anthony Smith. He's knocked out Jan Blachowicz. He's not only beat, but finished a lot of guys in this tournament. So with that being said, I don't see how a guy
this is where, and again, like if you look at Jiří Procházka's wins and maybe you don't hold Fabio Maldonado, CB Dalloway, Jay Kuhn, Brandon Halsey in the highest of regards in, the last 2 or 3 years, but it's a fact that Jiří Procházka's competed in events similar to this. That's the only thing that I'll say. True. He has experience in tournament formats where you have to keep continuing throughout the night to win, and he's able to finish those fights as well. And for that reason, yes, I would really worry if CB Dalloway can hit that lead leg.
CB Dalloway landed about 5 or 6 really good calf kicks against Procházka that didn't hurt him. I'm not going to say he was like limping on it, but they did enough that it's very concerning that if CB Dalloway, like you said, was able to land a shot like that, Thiago Santos is probably going to break your leg.
I can see a clear path for both guys. I'm going to lean towards Jiří Procházka in this one, but again, I can see Thiago Santos winning.
It would be a wicked fight. I can guarantee that much.
Let's say that. So, for the purpose of the show, we're going to go with Procházka moving on. Matt can curse me as much as he wants when the cameras are off.
Oh, but I like it that we don't have a rematch in the finals, to be fair. So
okay, so we don't have a rematch in the finals, and now we get squirrely with it. We have a little bit of fun. Yeah. We've got Jon Jones taking on the new blood in Jiří Procházka at 205 pounds.
I got bad news for Jiří, though. You can disagree with me as much as you want up until now, Craig, but I think I've got a good point.
You've got your rising champion coming into the UFC. You've got your UFC champion continuing on. You've got a clash of guys here that are incredible strikers in their own right. You look at Jiří Procházka, and he's a walking finish line because nobody gets to it, and he finishes you before you get there. For Jon Jones, it's just a tactician's dream. And this is a guy that you can liken him to different all-time greats in different sports. And yeah, his personal life is not good. It is not good.
Downright bad, some might say.
But we're not focusing on that with our Grand Prix style. So if you have Procházka that has wins over Rakic, Teixeira, and Santos versus Jon Jones that's had fights over Narkun, Volkan Oezdemir, and a rematch against Dominick Reyes, who are you picking in this one?
Got it real quick. Jon Jones probably going to win this fight, I would assume. He had a bye in the first round, basically a bye in the second round. I know Oezdemir has the chance to inflict quite a bit of damage, but I don't think it would happen. I just think Jon defensively is smart enough that he'd be able to get away from a lot of those damaging shots. So Jon Jones has fought basically one time in a really hard fight this whole night, and it's against Dominick Reyes, who isn't the most deadly power puncher. Jiří Procházka just fought Thiago Santos in a fight that I don't even think he was going to win that, but let's say he does win that. He's not getting out of that fight unscathed. And against Jon Jones, again, a guy who we've constantly said is really, really good at taking his opponent's information, downloading it, and then finding their weaknesses. He just watched Jiří Procházka fight 3 other times in the same night that he's fought. So you're not fighting Jon Jones. You're fighting Jon Jones, who knows everything you're going to do already. So that's kind of a nightmare matchup no matter who you are. You could be Stipe Miocic, and that's going to be tough. So I think Jon Jones would beat Jiří Procházka quite convincingly.
And I think it would be loss number 4, including Bojan Veličković, Abdul Karim Edilov, like you said, the Chechnyan Lion, and King Mo, Muhammad Lawal. So yeah, I think Jon Jones would be the 4th loss on Jiří Procházka's record, but a good fight nonetheless. And you never know. I mean, let's say Procházka comes into the UFC this year, is able to somehow fight twice or 3 times, and puts on great performances. All of a sudden, you're more than likely near the top end of this division and knocking on the door for a title shot. And again, who knows?
It's
like
going to be
that conversation's wide open. It could really be.
And especially with Jiří, he's got that kind of Justin Gaethje fight style, so they're going to push him off the cards pretty quick, especially if he is able to achieve some sort of level of success. My worry, though, is, and again, you have a guy who does not leave the first round, beating a lot of former UFC champions and fighters. And we've heard this story a lot of times. Guys who are monsters, Hector Lombard outside the UFC, and they're finishing everyone in the first round, and then they come over and they're just a shell of themselves. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But it's something you have to be concerned about.
Yeah, hopefully it's not like when Emil Mek beat Usman Palaris. And now we get Jiří Procházka and Jon Jones. So who knows what could happen. Let us know what you think of the bracket. Maybe you have Procházka losing to Rakic in the first round. It's a totally different bracket. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments.
I'll be in the comments
maybe
later.
Maybe we would have peppered in some different fighters in our top 16 in the bracket. So let us know. And again, it's an offshoot of Fight Night Picks Parry Counter. So if you have questions that you want to have us answer in Parry Counter, we take those out individually and analyze them for what they're worth. But this week we're going with the Grand Prix series and the brackets from 125 pounds up to heavyweight, which is going to come out tomorrow, so make sure you check that out. As always, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP, at Matt Allen FNP, at Fight Night Picks. And as always, Matt, like we like to say with Fight Night Picks,
Let's get into
it.